Greetings everyone in Morrison County. My name is Greg Spofford. Today I represent the Faith Not Fear Committee from Little Falls. And we're going to start a series of 3 different programs, eventually all run together. And that series is going to be talking about homelessness and housing concerns in Morrison County. I am so fortunate to have as my first guest today, Rose Cerma, who is the Executive Director of Oasis Central Minnesota. Just briefly, session number 2 will bring in some legislators and their role in the area of housing and homelessness in the state, as well as locally. And finally, community members and how the community has the opportunity to participate along with Oasis Central Minnesota and in partnership with other entities like Morrison County Social Services. So let's get right to it. Rose, again, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your presence. A lot of people think of homelessness and we don't think of homelessness in Morrison County. How does homelessness and even housing security, what does it look like here?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here, and thank you to Faith Not Fear and all the other participants that'll be speaking about this. As Greg said, I am from Oasis Central Minnesota. We are a nonprofit organization here in Morrison County, and we provide emergency shelter and also work and advocate to end homelessness and housing insecurity. I will say that, like many people here in the community, prior to starting this work, I didn't see homelessness in our community and felt like it wasn't an issue here. And I would say that it looks different in rural Minnesota. It may not look as it does on the news or in metropolitan areas, but it is here. It's present, and it has deep and lasting impacts on our families, our economy, our social safety net programs, medical systems, school systems, and criminal justice systems. So my hope here today is to talk about those immediate crisis needs and also some of the underlying issues that contribute to housing crisis.
I'm pretty excited. We're going to have a couple of stories or 2 real-life examples. I guess, what is the experience of homelessness versus those who have a house or who have a home?
Sure. So one thing I'm glad when we talk about this, we're using the term, the expression, experiencing homelessness rather than labeling and saying homeless. Yes. I think that it's really important that when we talk about this, that it's important to acknowledge that there can be a really big social stigma surrounding the term. I also think it's important to see those experiencing homelessness as more than their lack of housing, but as our neighbors, their mothers, their fathers, sisters, brothers, diverse and beautiful human beings. So that's, I'm glad you used that term, and that's what I'll try to do throughout this discussion, to separate that homeless person, that label, from that person's life, and it's more of their experience that they're experiencing.
You know, my own mom, this isn't about my mom, but my own mom experienced homelessness for a period of time, so it's close to my heart. Mm-hmm. What about housing insecurity versus, again, that experience of homelessness?
Sure. So there's sort of 2 separate housing crisis terms that we'll be using. We have the experience of homelessness, and we've defined that as any individual or family that is without a permanent place to stay, or they're staying somewhere that's not meant for human habitation. We also use the term housing insecurity, and there are many individuals that experience a variety of different housing insecurity situations. It's really an umbrella term that encompasses just any sort of housing problem people may experience, including affordability, safety, quality, or other imminent risk of housing loss. So those are sort of 2 housing crisis terms that we'll use throughout this discussion.
They can be confusing, so I really appreciate the differentiation for that. What do we have for emergency shelter programs in our area?
Sure. So as I mentioned, Oasis Central Minnesota does provide emergency shelter in our community. We are the only emergency shelter provider in Morrison County, and really most of the surrounding counties. Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless reports that 80 of Minnesota's 87 counties lack enough emergency shelter to meet their community needs. So what we do provide here, we have 2 different sort of places we provide shelter. We utilize area motels, as well as we've acquired beginning this January, we have a duplex with 2 apartments. And that setting, we really focus on families and has worked really well. With both of those sort of emergency shelter programs, we have case managers that our clients work with to just connect to community resources and address any issues that may have caused that housing insecurity. And that's really a key piece to making people transitioning to stable permanent housing and maintaining that is connecting to community resources and supports.
A lot of people think of Morrison County Social Services as being able to do the entire job, but they are referring to you as well as other agencies as well. What about program numbers? Can you tell us a little bit about it in terms of how many people are being affected by homelessness?
Sure, and that's a good question. So last year, we, Morrison County, provided 1,623 bed nights. That's nights. That's sort of how in the shelter community we measure things, but that's those nights annually where people were sheltered by Oasis Central Minnesota. And I always like to say that's 1,623 nights that a Morrison County resident was safe and had shelter. Annually, we serve around 250 households, and those are housing services from emergency shelter to also working with people that are maybe housing insecure, where they have an issue with their housing that could be addressed, or they need to find alternate housing if that's not an option. 85% of those that we work with do transition to permanent, stable housing. And another sort of number, 50% of those impacted by homelessness are minor children. So that's a huge and very, very sad number, but it definitely impacts children and can have those lasting effects.
Wow, that's amazing in a sad sort of way. But you've also presented some really positive statistics at Oasis, 85% that you can follow. That's really good stats. But 50% of children. And again, just the hopefulness that Oasis and you and your case managers are able to provide. Tell us a little bit more about these children and families and the impact.
Yeah. So, and I always think of this as, just how difficult it would be to, when I'm sitting in the school line picking my kids up, if you didn't have that safe place to go, how that would feel and how that could impact your family. And when you go into some research, I know the state of Minnesota will report they've done a lot of data, but overall, when families and children have a safe, healthy place to call home, increases participation in the workforce, reduces criminal justice involvement, and increases educational outcomes for children. Another component that we often see with families and children, in Minnesota, across the state, 80% of women with children that experience homelessness also have experienced domestic or family violence in the household. And finally, there's a strong relationship between the number of moves during childhood and the odds for reporting negative outcomes such as health outcomes, depression, smoking, attempted suicide, alcoholism, and teen pregnancy for kids. So really having a stable home environment is so critical to the family's health and the overall long-term health for those children and families.
I know you also work with the schools in the area and how each school district has its own homeless liaison, and they realize they're not even capturing all the numbers because there is that stigma you talked about earlier.
Yep.
Healthcare is another thing, so it's not just homelessness, it's all sorts of things, including healthcare.
Yep, so healthcare, your overall physical health can really be impacted by not having a safe place to stay. It's a place where you can recover, treat illness. We've had many referrals from the hospital where people are ending up in the emergency rooms because they can't care for their physical health living outdoors or in a vehicle. So it's such an important piece for that as well. And there are some outcomes, liver, poor health, food insufficiency, bronchitis, dental health, and alcohol dependency that have a 2 to 5 times higher rate for people that are experiencing homelessness where they have bad health outcomes. So it's really important for all types of health, but including that physical health as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the emotional health. Habitat for Humanity, for example, says it really can't work with a family in terms of helping build things up until they have a safe place to call home.
Yep.
You've got another graph that we're glancing at, and we're really appreciative that Great River TV is going to be putting these alongside our dialogue so people can actually look at these different things. What are you showing right here in terms of that connection to poverty?
Sure. So in addition to sort of physical health, of course, mental health is something that can be really impacted by loss of housing or housing crisis. We often see people that have a manageable mental health condition. If that they have a housing loss, all of a sudden things sort of can snowball, and that mental health condition can become unmanageable. And really, in order to treat that, to be able to regularly take your medication and focus on that health, having that stable place to call home is very important. And that's part of the way when I started doing this work, I thought, well, there has to be a gold standard of addressing homelessness, and that's really the housing first model, which says people in these situations may have mental health, addiction, physical health challenges, but in order for them to properly manage those or deal with them without stable housing, it becomes almost impossible. So the model is to provide that stable shelter, stable housing, and then work to connect and address those issues. So that's really what we try and do as well, that there may be some challenges, but in order to properly address them, that housing is such a critical piece.
So we just can't point a finger and say, well, there's the problem. That person has an alcohol problem. There's the problem. That person is lazy and doesn't want to work. It's a multitude of things that just snowball, like you say. And golly, I'm just appreciative that Oasis can take a look at that. And yet you're not the only one that can do that.
Exactly, and that's why I'm so glad there'll be a full panel of people here. We provide an important component, but we work across with a variety of different service providers, from recovery to mental health to the schools, social services, of course. All of those pieces need to come together, and we try and be that stable ground in order to provide those connections.
I have personally met with some of the wonderful people that Rose has walked with, both individually and with families. And boy, do they get excited when they can give back to the community, when their temporary need of homelessness has become something more permanent. So there's a lot of hope, and we're going to have some of that within our stories here, as well as the future segments. Rose, where are people at? Because I don't see the homeless as I would envision on the streets of Minneapolis. Where are people who are homeless, where are they at?
Sure. That's true, and that's, I think, a lot of why people feel like it's not a concern or an issue in our community, is you don't see it in the same way. Most of the people that experience homelessness here in our community, most of them by far are what we call couch hopping, or moving from house to house. And that's probably the most common situation throughout the state, and some of that is due to just lack of available shelters. And what I will say about that is that maybe superficially it may seem to be, sort of an okay scenario, but often those people, when you're in that scenario, you're so vulnerable for exploitation in so many different ways. And so it really can be one of the least safe situations people find themselves in. We also see people that are living in vehicles quite often, people outdoors in tents or unsheltered, fish houses, just a variety of different situations, park structures. There have been people that have been sleeping. I think some of it is there's the population density is just more spread out in our community. We're not a metropolitan area. And then there's also, again, that stigma, being a smaller community, where people sort of tend to hide their situation a little bit more than maybe in areas where you have more anonymity.
Boy, I do remember a mom that was in her car along with her school-age son, and I guess he was a junior in high school, and a girlfriend, that they just, and they're doing well now, but it's not always obvious, as you said.
Yep.
Do we have a story or two to really bring it home.
Sure.
And while you get that story ready, I'm just going to add that at this time I'm aware of 2 families as well with kids that are not, meet some of the definition of homelessness. I won't get specific, but 2 families that are, and 4 individuals that are homeless. So I think having walked with you in Oasis, I've had that privilege in the past, that has actually brought home the story. And then some of my own family members who are either fearful, have housing insecurity, or have been homeless themselves. You've got a story
Sure.
that somebody that's offered to share their story.
She's offered to have her story shared, so I'll read it as she wrote it and share her story. So, I had been living with my 3 children in an abusive marriage. I was isolated and alone and did not have any support or family that I could turn to. My husband was controlling of every aspect of our lives. My 3 elementary age school children were not allowed to go to school, and I was staying home, homeschooling them. Without my husband, I had no income, no health care, no cell phone, and nowhere to go. Finally, despite the fear of leaving with nothing, the violence became too much for me, and I decided I wanted to leave with my children. I packed up my vehicle when my husband was away, not knowing where I would go, only that I needed to leave, and my husband could not know where I was going. The women's shelters were full, and thinking of having to travel to another city somewhere else. I didn't even know how I would find somewhere else to go or how I would afford gas to get there if I knew of somewhere. I did not know where I could turn. We spent that first day driving around the area, walking through the grocery store with only a couple of dollars in my pocket that I could spend. I was able to afford some food for my children, but there was not enough for me to eat that evening. We spent that first evening in our vehicle in a parking lot. Sleeping in a vehicle with 3 children is uncomfortable and terrifying. I was constantly worried that my husband would find out where I was, that my children would not be safe, or I would be victimized by someone else. I did not know how long we could live this way, how I would feed my children tomorrow, shower, or survive. That morning I went to social services desperate for help. I was referred to Oasis Central Minnesota for help. When I met with Oasis, I was finally able to have some hope. They provided me with shelter in a motel, a food card to get some food, and assured me that everything would be confidential. And they told me they would help me connect to resources. When they found out that it was my youngest son's birthday that Friday, they helped me to throw him a birthday party in the hotel lobby with cake, balloons, and even a few presents. My kids will never forget that party and how loved and safe they felt. The case management helped me to get food and cash help from social services and enroll my children in school, find a part-time job, connect to a victim service resource, legal aid, and after 90 days in shelter, I was able to move into my own townhouse. I truly believe this helped save my life. I have been living in my townhome for the last 2 years, and I feel so safe and grateful. My children are thriving in school. They are involved in music and sports for the first time. I have joined a church and am involved with that community. Having an emergency shelter changed my life and has allowed me to give my children a bright future.
Oh my gosh, Rose. I'm fogging up because this is what happens, but the hope part is really jumping out at me, and I guess rather than wait until the 3rd segment, if people feel a call to how they might be able to help, are volunteers or donations or whatever, are they accepted by Oasis?
Sure. Right now, there's not a ton for volunteering, but we always accept donations. We accept a lot of types of donations, of course, financial contributions.
Sure.
But something that is also fun, we also accept personal care items, diapers, shampoos, soaps, socks, toenail clippers.
Wow.
We have those available for people as they need them.
Right.
So people are, we love to see those kinds of donations, and it's really fun to give them away. There is a local church I'll just share that does, I think a couple times a year, they call it a shower, and they collect all those items, and then they have like their tea and coffee, and it's a fun way that they give back. So of course, like I said, we'll always accept financial donations, but sometimes some of those, giving someone a quilt or a pair of socks can be really meaningful, that they know when they're in need that someone thought about them and that they might need that. So,
Rose, I want to give you a chance. Are we missing anything of this first segment in terms of the need? You've also provided hope. So we have the issue, the concern of homelessness, which is right here in Little Falls, the Morrison County area. But you've also given us hope, and that's really exciting. And the next couple of segments will address that. But are we missing anything?
I think we've covered it. Anyone can always contact me if they have questions about anything we've talked about or want more information about it. I think it's important to remain hopeful, to really know that people are resilient, and people do want to live healthy, meaningful lives. And I think what I've been really hopeful, what's brought me a lot of hope, is working in this community, because I get the sense every time I go somewhere and talk about this or talk about the work I do, people really want to address this, and people are very caring and understanding. So I think that we have everything we need here to come together to both address these sort of immediate crisis needs, but also the people in place that are having these conversations about what the long-term solutions are. So I think we're headed in the right direction.
Well, golly, Rose, thank you so much for being a part of this first segment. I'm thinking of bringing Rose back for that third segment, and we'll see where that goes at this point. We're grateful to GRTV, and contact information will be listed on a poster. And we just thank you so much, community members, for who you are. And just, I'll just add one thing in a spiritual level, not pushing any particular religion, but for those who pray about this as well. Thank you very much, Rose. Thank you, Mark.